I'm one of the only people who's actually figured out what at least one alleged UFO crash part is for. So recently, I've actually, with my help of my friends Mark, who came up earlier, remember we played the YouTube video from him with the spinning, thanks to my friends Mark and Jarrett, they're, aerospace guys who are doing anti-gravity research. They're the real guys who are actually trying to make anti-gravity reality. Nobody's, no Men in Black have killed them yet. You ask them, they're like, oh, it's a good day today, right? Because Men in Black haven't killed me yet today. But basically, thanks to them, I got a piece. It's known as the Art Part. Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM. Linda Moulton Howe also had this. So I got a fragment that's allegedly from New Mexico from 1947. And I've been doing material analysis on it. And I'm going to publish a paper on it, hopefully by the end of this year or next year. Then I'm going to print out that paper, and I want to shove it up the ass or down the throat of every single skeptic and debunker, because we found that material is anomalous and discovered that the Arrow report on this material was a lie. It was a whitewash. Wow. They didn't list half of the elements in it. They didn't list any of the interesting isotopic configurations. Nothing. Gary Nolan knows this. A few people know this who have pieces of the mother sample. There was a big sample. I only got a fragment of it. Right. And I developed a whole new technique. I developed a new way of testing what something is made of faster and cheaper.
You did?
Yes, I did, than existing techniques. Yes. And so I'm hoping that people start sending me like actual parts. I can determine whether something is terrestrial or extraterrestrial.
How?
By the isotopic ratio.
Okay.
So everything is made of elements, and each of those elements has isotopes, but the isotopic ratios are unique to different planets, different parts of the galaxy. Still doesn't conclusively prove something's extraterrestrial, because a skeptic could always say, oh, it was part of a nuclear test and it changed the isotopic composition. Sure.
Right.
But what I can demonstrate is whether something is weird. I know that's very vague, but I can demonstrate whether something's weird, whether it's anomalous, or whether it's boring. Right. Like, oh, this is just a hunk of aluminum.
That reminds me, are you familiar with there was some sort of material with a certain configuration of isotopes that was found in in the middle of like nuclear blasts that they found that matched the exact type of material they found on Mars? Have you ever heard of this?
I have not heard of this. Oh, so maybe we created it by accident.
Giorgiani was remember this, Steve, when Giorgiani was talking about this?
Oh, are you talking about the possibility there was like a nuclear war back in the day on Mars?
This was his theory, but the hard evidence that he explained to back this up was that there was some sort of material with isotopes that were found on in nuclear blast sites.
Yes. I definitely heard of this.
That matched specific isotopes they configure like.
You're talking about the Mars
place.
I know who you're talking about because he's one of the co-stars on a show I'm on, actually. The proof is out there on the History Channel.
Okay.
And he's the Mars guy. I know who you're talking about, the guy who thinks that there was a civilization on Mars.
John Brandenburg theory suggests that the red color of Mars could be evidence of catastrophic. But what's
Xenon 129?
Xenon 129. That's what it is.
Funny coincidence. Remember, I use Xenon to look for dark matter, right?
Right.
So that's just a coincidence.
Right. So what does it say? So Giordani claims
Cydonia. Yes. So I don't think it's Brandenburg, but one of his associates. Something. There's a guy who's head of the Cydonia Society, who's a co-star on The Proof Is Out There with me.
Oh, so this is what the theory. So Xenon 129 is consistent across the entire solar system except for on Mars. Yes. So that we're talking about isotopic ratios. Yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Is that there are unique signatures in different locations. Yeah, Mars is a problem, but exactly. But my point is that I want to look at the isotopic ratios. I'm using a non-destructive technique to determine the composition of a material. I'll tell you though, so far, I've only gotten one potentially anomalous thing. Most of the things is UFO, crazy people send me, it's a meteorite, or it's a piece of an airplane. So most of the time, unfortunately, it's boring. But finally, thanks to knowing the right people and being patient, I finally got a piece of something that's really interesting. And and let's see how silent the mainstream media is going to be on this. I'm going to publish later this year definitive evidence that the government lied about this material and published a whitewash report claiming it was not anomalous when they knew better. And I have definitive proof that it's anomalous, it's strange. I don't have proof it's extraterrestrial, to be clear. Not yet.
It was a device containing 3 entities, which were part of the device, essentially. They were biological entities. And supposedly one of them was still alive when it was brought to light, but General Exon didn't say anything about that. The only thing, and he didn't tell me this directly, he told one of my relatives this, that he had held one in his arms, and it was like a big insect. That was his precise description. My uncle said that he didn't refer to the bodies. He referred only to the debris and the object, which he said was somewhat intact. And so they had, from Roswell, partially intact object and some debris and bodies.
3 bodies.
3 bodies. And Walter Haut, who was the press officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, left an affidavit which was published by his family after he died, describing all of this, the bodies and so forth, in great detail. And he said to me, I went out to Roswell to talk to him. He said he wouldn't talk about the bodies. I asked him point blank, were there bodies? And he was simply silent. He wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no, because he didn't like to lie. He was a very straight ahead guy, Walt was. And so he left this is as much as he could do. And Colonel Jesse Marcel left a videotape with, thanks to Stanton Friedman, where he describes in detail the debris that he found and brought in to his home in his station wagon with his little boy, who Dr. Marcel passed away just a couple of years ago, who attested to this story also.
Right.
So it happened.
Have you ever heard Annie Jacobson's account of this crash?
I don't think it's correct. Yes, I do know it very well.
It seems really compelling. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that theory, but it's interesting that she's the only one that talks about it, and no one else seems to appreciate it or take it seriously at all. You think the guy who told her, essentially, for people that are listening, Annie Jacobson wrote in her book Area 51 that there was an engineer of a private aerospace company or something like that who was working in Arizona or Nevada, who told Annie under anonymity that the device that crashed in Roswell was a Wright brothers or something engineered craft, like some sort of human-made flying saucer with children that were surgically manipulated to look like aliens from the Nazi Mengele, his name was.
Yeah, I know the story, but go ahead and tell it, because
so people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah.
And essentially, Stalin sent the craft over here, remote controlled it over here, and crashed it with these children, these Russian children that were deformed by this Nazi, to sow chaos within the United States.
Okay, I can tell you a lot about that and where that comes from.
And let me just finish the end of it. She asked this guy, Stephen, you could probably find his name if you just Google Annie Jacobson, engineer Roswell. I find out who his name actually was. She actually talked about it on Lex Friedman's podcast recently. And she asked him later, she goes, why wouldn't you make this public? Why is this such a big secret? Why are you waiting until you're essentially on your deathbed to tell me this? Why didn't you guys sit? Because if you guys would have let the public know when this happened, it would not hurt the image of America. It would hurt the image of Russia, because it makes them look like, sickos. It makes them look like sinister people. The fact that they would do something like this. And his response to Annie was, because we started doing the same thing as soon as we found what they did. As soon as we found out that they were altering children and doing this stuff in Roswell, or in Russia, we started experimenting with the same thing. And we know that in I think it was the 70s and 80s, that there was projects going on the East Coast of the United States where they were injecting children with plutonium and all kinds of, nuclear material to test on them. And I think Bill Clinton shut it down in like the early 90s.
I don't know anything about that, and therefore I can't speak of it. Mm-hmm. But what I can speak of is what I do know. I'll circle back for a moment to General Exon and my uncle. Before I published Communion, I knew nothing about General Exon, and I knew nothing about my uncle's work in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. Nothing. Nobody in the family did.
In 1947, when that thing crashed, like, we still don't even know what happened with that, right? There's still like so much speculation on what happened. There's like, there's a handful of different theories of what happened, and no one can agree on anything except for the fact that it probably wasn't a weather balloon, right? There was allegedly there was the guy who wrote the book on Roswell, day after Roswell. He explained.
Is that Corso's book?
Yes, yeah. That's Corso's book. He explained there being Kevlar and Velcro in this crash, like clearly man-made technology that was found. That no one ever talks about that. Like, if this was some sort of interstellar craft, why were they using Velcro and Kevlar?
Yeah. Well, I thought he had mentioned he was claiming that they developed Kevlar from what was found in the craft, but I didn't know about the Velcro part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read his book, so I don't know those details. I'd seen an interview with him. But.
Right.
Yeah, no, that whole thing is a real mess, because you've got the U.S. government coming out with multiple statements throughout the years, changing the story every time. Right. Mm-hmm. And, one of my favorite ones from the early 1990s was an Air Force statement that said they were testing a Mars lander and the disk was the back shell of the lander. Well, who's testing a Mars lander in 1947 10 years before Sputnik?
Right.
That's a ridiculous thing to even say. Doesn't make any sense. And so clearly a lie, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, came out, they came up with Project Mogul, but Project Mogul is a weather balloon problem. What they were trying to do with Project Mogul is they wanted to put radio wave detectors up so that they could detect the electromagnetic radiation from nuclear explosions from Soviet bomb testing, right? But the problem is you wanted to hold these balloons at something like 50,000 feet. The problem with balloons is you let the thing go up, and the balloon goes up and up and up, and as the balloon goes up, the air pressure outside goes down, so the balloon gets bigger and expands and eventually breaks, and the thing falls. Mm-hmm. So Project Mogul was about trying to figure out how to maintain a certain altitude for a balloon. And so they were releasing test balloons, right? They're trying to be up at 50,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And then the claim is that the balloon that was launched in early June, the balloon that was launched in early June was the one that crashed on Mac Brazel's farm or ranch in Roswell, near Roswell, New Mexico. But the problem is that when you look at the records of the New York University professor who was running Project Mogul, they didn't launch a balloon in June. They couldn't launch. The weather was bad, so they didn't launch. Yeah, so there was no balloon up. And had they done it, it would have been an illegal thing to do because the conditions weren't right to be able to monitor the position of the balloon. It wouldn't have been a good experiment anyway. Right. So they didn't even have a balloon up. We have those records. So we know it wasn't Project Mogul. But Kirkpatrick in Arrow comes out with his report and says again it's Project Mogul, which we know it's not. So we know the government has been changing the story every time and lying every time. So what actually happened is a good question. I mean, what was so serious that when the Army found that the sheriff of in the area went to the ranch to look at the debris himself, they found that out and they detained him and his family for 5 days. What warrants that? Mm-hmm. A radio balloon experiment? Really?
Yeah.
That's hard to believe.
This is the paradox of trying to rely on the government to give us any sort of confirmation about any of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? This is the paradox of it, because they have been clearly trying to deceive and muddy up the waters of this topic forever.
Yeah.
So trying to rely on them is something that's, it's futile. It feels like it's just like,
I think it's a waste of time.
I think so too.
Plus there are other governments on the planet, other governments who actually know things.
Yeah.
So let's work with them. Go down to talk to the Chileans. Maybe they'll talk. They've collected data. They've collected information. I'd rather spend time with other governments than wasting time with this one.
But a lot of those governments are subservient to the U.S. government.
And that is a problem, yeah.
Yeah. I've heard stories that this whole topic, there's like zero stigma when it comes to this stuff in like Russia, for example. Like even like the government and the population, they're all into like esoteric UFOs, astrology, and all this stuff, and they're openly.
They go through waves like we do, and we talk about that Russia a little bit in our paper. We didn't have the French co-authors produced a lot of the material on the Russians. So we talked about that in the paper, and they had gone through phases where they would start studying UFOs, and then somebody would say that's ridiculous, and they would shut it down, and then they would start up again and shut it down, kind of like what happens here. It goes up and down a good bit.
A bunch of stuff in that book about like Velcro and Kevlar and all these like human technologies that were found in that crash. Do you think that was added by this Hollywood guy? Or do you think that was real?
Some of them were added, and some of them weren't. But the distinguishing difference Corso makes in his work is like integrated circuitry and transistors and stuff. He makes the claim that a lot of these stuff weren't copied. Like the technology wasn't basically seeded from craft, but we as humans had our own evolution of these technologies, and an understanding of a different variation of something like the transistor integrated circuit allowed for further advancements of our technology. Because I know Jesse talked about it with you, or I can't remember where Jesse talked about it, but he was skeptical that stuff like transistors were taken from the Roswell craft when transistors and various concepts for transistors had existed previously. And I tend to agree with that. I think if anything, that technology was likely used to bolster existing technology and not just copied.
So you think that thing was a reproduction vehicle?
No. So like I think that humans, let's take the transistor, for example. If a transistor was pulled from the Roswell craft, I think that humans were already working on concepts similar to transistors, technology similar to transistors, and pulling like a more advanced transistor type piece of technology off the Roswell crash may have allowed us to make quicker advancements in our current human prosaic technology because we can analyze non-human technology, not inventing technology out of the ether because we just pull it from a non-human source.
Right.
So more so just like not copying somebody else's homework, but taking influence from other technology on existing technologies.
Right.
There's still a lot of questions with Corso, right? Like there's a lot of rebuttals for most of that technology created. I mean, even passive night vision systems, Colonel John Alexander, who I have my problems with.
Yeah, night vision was another technology they found in the crash.
Well, Corso said that there was an eye film on the beans, and that's where passive night vision systems were pulled from. That's a very big claim. But what's interesting to me about this is in the manuscript, it was just made for his grandchildren, right? It wasn't made for public consumption. It was made for his family. So it's not like he's trying to sell this story to a huge world, because there's massive differences in the manuscript versus the book. The book talks the first chapter about Corso sitting like Isaac Newton under a tree, like thinking about the Roswell crash, basically placing himself there. No, the manuscript is super dry. It repeats itself dozens, if not hundreds of times, but it just is basically Corso's words actually from Corso and not with added fluff. Like in the book, there's one like senior intelligence or DOD official that Corso basically convinces to, perform a self-inflicted gunshot wound with. Like Corso acts so tough to do that. That's not in the manuscript. That's fluff nonsense to make something sell to Hollywood. So there's a lot of added information that I really understand why people take Corso so skeptically if all they've read is The Day After Roswell. Right.
What is your take on John Alexander?
John Alexander, I don't know. What I think the most interesting example of where John Alexander was present was 1985 at the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group that was held at BDM's facility in McLean, Virginia. Right. So this was an event that Oki Shannon, if you've heard of Oki Shannon, he was director of like special projects at Los Alamos National Labs. And he is mentioned multiple times in the Wilson Davis interview. In 1985, he went to attend this event at BDM McLean. This event was classified using DOE controls, right? Which is really interesting. A lot of it was ran by John Alexander, and at that time, new BDM board member Albert Stubblebine, who had just left U.S. Army INSCOM for BDM in 1984. At this conference, there was so much talk about UFO reverse engineering programs, conducted through speeches and organization by Alexander, including a massive mention of I think it says like huge engineering project under Bobby Ray Inman. And of course, that's somebody we talked about. That's the guy, right? No, Bobby Ray Inman is the neuro guy. He's the CIA guy. He's the NSA guy. He's the SAIC guy. He's the Wackenhut guy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What he's one of the main villains of this entire story, I'd say. Something I forgot to tell you about is in 1989, he talked to NASA mission specialist Bob Eschler. Bob Eschler called him. Somehow they got in a relationship and were talking to each other, and Bob Eschler basically asked if recovered UFOs would ever become available for technological research. And what's interesting is this phone call is recorded, so you can actually listen to it. And Bobby Ray Inman does the whole I know nothing about that, but directs Eschler to current CIA DS&T Director of Science and Technology Deputy Director Everett Hindman. Says, if you want to know about it, go talk to Hindman. So Eschler talks about Hindman. Hindman freaks out, says, no, don't talk to me. Nothing there. Hindman was also director of the NRO Program B and was actually one of the first heads of Pine Gap when it opened up in the 70s. In 2023, a UFO researcher, RGH UFOs, emailed Hindman, and I wish he would get back to me, but he's never responded to me. And Hindman alluded that he did, in fact, work in UFO programs. He said, I'm no longer in that area of research. But back to Inman. Inman also pointed Bob Eschler, NASA mission specialist, to former Director of Naval Intelligence, Sumner Shapiro. Sumner Shapiro was also a BDM board member, but Sumner Shapiro met with Bob Eschler, and Sumner Shapiro told Bob Eschler that not only had he studied craft up close, but they were shipped between different DOE laboratories, and some of them featured interlocking components that had to be assembled and disassembled in certain ways if you're going to gain access to the craft. So Bobby Ray Inman, points Bob Eschler to all sorts of these guys. Bobby Ray Inman is former director of Neuro, CIA, all this. But then in 2020, and this echoes the present very well, Bobby Ray Inman appeared on Project Unity, Jay Anderson's podcast, and said he had found conventional explanations for every single UFO sighting.